We're going to
Yeah,
introduce
I'm
him.
I'm I'm here, Rabbi. Just
Great,
can't put
Ari.
on the video.
Okay,
Okay?
okay. So it's not just a name on the screen.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
We're going to introduce Be'ezer Hashem a new topic here. You have 4 pages on milchama, and I thought that was an appropriate topic. And even though now we're going through a period of a ceasefire, but my belief and my hope actually is that we're going to resume this milchama because we're far from the goal. Now, by way of introduction, the concept of milchama, which is very high profile in the Torah, whether it's the Torah Shebachsav, the Torah Shebal Peh, Sugyas, whether it's Mishnayos, whether it's Rambams, Rambans, we're going to see a sheet of Rashi. The issue is whether or not a milchama is a mitzvah. And if it is a mitzvah, what mitzvah does it come under? And we have 2 concepts. One is called a milchemes mitzvah, and the other is called a milchemes reshus. And they appear in the Mishnah in Sota, which you can see here on the bottom of your page 1 in Sota Mem Dalet Amud Beis. And the question is going to be, my nafkamina, what is the difference between a milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes reshus? Not an easy question to answer. One of the issues we're going to deal with is, do we initiate the milchama? Another question we're going to address is, when do we initiate the milchama? Are there certain preconditions before we initiate a milchama? There's also a war in which we don't really have an enemy that is actually attacking us, but they are threatening to attack us. And therefore, we start the war even before we're being attacked. We're going to study in Mirza Hashem the Rambam and Hilchas Malachim, but also the Rambam and Hilchas Rotzeach. There are many Rambams that have to be put together. Now, in terms of Chil Shabbos, do we initiate a milchama on Shabbos? And would it possibly depend upon whether it's a milchemes mitzvah or milchemes reshus? And the question of whether or not we send people, potential soldiers, back to their homes and exempt them from a milchama. Is there a difference between a milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes reshus? But perhaps the most fundamental question we want to raise is the question of extending a peace offering as a precondition to milchama. And if the Torah says, as we'll see this psukim in Mirza Hashem, that kisikra v'la'ir v'karasa elea l'shalom, if that applies to a milchemes reshus, nicha, I understand that. But would it apply even to a milchemes mitzvah? And before we go out to battle in a milchemes mitzvah, we offer a peace offering. That is going to be a fundamental question about the nature and the definition of a mitzvah of milchama. So once again, we're trying to figure out what constitutes a mitzvah of milchama. When is it a mitzvah? When is it only a reshus? When can you initiate war? And obviously, if chayalim are involved in a milchemes mitzvah, then we apply the principle of a osek b'mitzvah patur min a mitzvah. But nevertheless, we might be sending back some of the soldiers. Or does that halach only apply to a milchemes reshus? Let's note in the beginning of our discussion, as we kick it off, that Yeshayahu Navi, in a very famous passage, tells us that we long and dream for the day when there will be no more war. So that even though Shlomo Melech in Koheles speaks about an ace milchama, but nevertheless, in the words of Yeshayahu, V'hoya bi'achris hayomim. This is in the second chapter of Yeshayahu HaNavi, and he's describing a vision of the achris hayomim. He speaks about the Harabayis, which is Nachon, and it is attracting people from all over the world. V'holchu amim rabim v'amru l'chu v'nalel har Hashem el beis Elokei Yaakov. And the peoples of the world will be pulled, gravitationally pulled to the Har Hashem, v'yorenu midrachav, and ask for ways in which they should live their lives. V'nelcha b'erchosav, ki mitzion tetzei sorah. And then finally, at the apex of his discussion and description of the Achris Hayomim, that vision, v'shafat ben hagoyim v'hochiach lama rabim v'chitisu charbosam li'itim, halavai, the United Nations would really believe in this. V'chani toseim lemezmeros lo yisa goyel goy cherev loyim leduog milchama. But milchama is something that is a reality. It's a necessity. And we're going to try to categorize when is a milchama obligatory. We have a concept, as we said before, of milchemes reshus, a so-called discretionary war. But whatever war it is, we long and we desire and aspire for the day in which lo yisa goyel goy cherev. Now, milchama appears in the Torah in 4 different parshios. The first milchama is that in which Yoshua goes out to battle against Amalek in Parshas Beshalach. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe ksov zos zikaron v'sefer sim b'yozne Yoshua ki mocho emche ez zeker Amalek mitachas hashamayim. So notice here that the mechia of Amalek is in the hands of the Almighty. Ki mocho emcha, God says. Now we attach that to Parshas Ki Teitze, which is number 4 on your list. And there, it's our battle against Amalek. We are commanded Timcha Ezecher Amalek. And therefore, the concept of mitzvahs milchama with regard to Amalek is what we would call in modern Hebrew a shituf pu'ula. Amalek is really attacking not just the Jewish people, but also the Almighty. And the battle here on the part of what we call the good guys is both Hashem and Klal Yisrael together in a partnership. Then we look in Sefer Dvarim, and in Sefer Dvarim, we have another category of milchama. And this is not the category of Amalek, but it's conditional on entering into the land of Israel. And therefore, the Torah in Dvarim Perek Zayin introduces Kiviyacha Hashem Elokecha La'aretz Asher Ato Bo Shama L'Rishta. And the Torah goes on to enumerate 7 nations. We have the Chiti, the Girgashi, the Amori, the Knani, the Prisi, the Chivi, Vaivusi, Shiva, Goyim. These are the 7 Amamim that occupy the land of Israel. And the Torah gives us a command, a mitzvah saseh, of the Kisam Hachreim Tachrimosam. Total destruction. And if you have any doubts about it, and you only have the essay of Hachreim Tachreim, then let's add to this a Lotase. And this you'll see in Dvarim Perek Chaf, and we're looking at Pasuk Tezayin. Does everybody see that? Again, in a Zoom share, it's a little bit difficult for me to gauge whether you're looking at the same pasuk that I am. And especially if all I see is your name on a screen. But in any event, going on with all my efforts, in pasuk Tesvav, it says, Kain ta'aseh l'chol ha'arim harachokos mimcha mi'od. And then the Torah is talking up to pasuk Tesvav about the cities that are rechokim. Where are they rechokim from? They're rechokos from Arei Agoyim ha'elim. So there's Arei Agoyim and Arei harachokos mimcha. Two sets of countries, cities. Now, from pasuk Yud in Dvarim Perek Chaf until pasuk Tesvav, and again, if by chance you printed this out, it's very convenient to take a pen and make a line that separates the first 6 psukim that are addressing Arim Rechokos. And that line is sort of like a mechitza that separates those 6 psukim, Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Al Tesvav, which are the Arim Rechokos Mimcha, from Pasuk Tezayin, which begins a new chapter in the book, conceptually. And once again, the Torah in Pasuk Tezayin is not talking about Arim Rechokos Mimcha, that are beyond the boundaries of the Goyim Ha'ela. Now we're talking about the Goyim Ha'ela. And in Pasuk Tezayin, Rak. The word Rak here is a distinction. When you get to Oriya Amim Ha'elu, you're on a different wavelength. Asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lecha nachla lo sechaya kol neshama ki hachrim tachrim. And once again, the Torah delineates 7 nations in the Arim Ha'ela. Ha'ela means here in Eretz Yisrael, and the Torah reiterates the mitzvahs aseh of hachrim tachrim and adds a lo taseh of lo techaya kol neshama. And the one who is very sensitive to this distinction, to separate the first 6 psukim from the continuation of this perek from Tet Zayin and on, is none other than Rashi. And if you fast forward for a moment to page 3, you will see that the Ramban opens up his discussion here with Rashi. And the key words are b'milchemes harshus hakosim medaber. So again, if you printed out the pages, I would like you to bold and underline those words, b'milchemes harshus hakosim medaber. And Rashi is now categorizing 2 different milchamos. There's one milchama, which is a milchemes mitzvah, and another which is milchemes rishus. And Rashi identifies that distinction with ha'arim ha'eleh as opposed to arim harachokos mimcha. In the case of arim ha'eleh, we have an essay and a losaseh to destroy the entire 7 nations. Losachaya kol neshama. But we won't get up to that, says Rashi, until Pasuk Tezayin, when it says Losachaya kol neshama, referring to Arei ha'amim ha'eleh. What do we have at the beginning of this parsha? Says Rashi, we have a milchemes rishus. These are the Arim harachokos mimcha. We're not exactly sure at this point in our discussion, why are we fighting a battle of rishus? Why are we initiating a war that's discretionary and is not obligatory? But if we're talking about just in terms of describing the difference between these two categories of Mulchama, the difference lies in the following. There's Arim Ha'eleh and there's Arim HaRechokos Mincha. With regard to Arim Ha'eleh, we're talking about a Mulchemes Mitzvah. With regard to Arei Rechokos, outside the boundaries of the land of Israel, we're talking about a Mulchemes Rishus. My nafkamina. Well, first nafkamina is obvious, whether it's a mitzvah or it's a rishus. What else? Says Rashi, take a look at the first pasuk in this section. That's Dvarim Chav, which I organized on page 1 under Gimel, and pasuk Yud, the first pasuk. Ki sikrav al ir li lachem alea. Rashi says that this ear is Arim HaRechokos. And this pasuk Yud is a self-contained unit which ends with pasuk Tezayin. So that's why I said before, make a line here between Yud and Tesvav. Tesvav is the last pasuk in this section. Says Rashi, we're talking about a Mulchemes Rishus. So we ask the question, my nafkamina, tremendous nafkamina. Let's read pasuk Yud. Ki sikrav al ir. Where is the city? It's outside the bounds of Eretz Yisrael. Li lachem aleh. V'karasa eleha l'shol. We're not even engaged in a war. We haven't begun the battle. There's a precondition. There is an obligation, first and foremost, of offering peace. Says Rashi, B'medvar mamurim. That's only in a Mulchemes Rishus. Arim HaRechokos Mincha. And Rashi quotes a Sifri. The Sifri says that b'Mulchemes HaRishus HaKosum Medaber. Obviously, the Sifri is emphasizing the distinction between these two categories of Mulchama. Because otherwise, what does it mean b'Mulchemes Rishus HaKosum Medaber? Why don't you just lump it all together? B'Mulchama HaKosum Medaber. And I don't need the Sifri for that because it says Ki sikrav al ir li lachem aleh. So Rashi quotes pasuk Tes Vav v'kein tasel chol arim harachokus mimcha miod. That's the Mulchemes Rishus for the Arim HaRechokos, about which the Torah says v'karasa eleha l'shalom. And that's the sheet of Rashi. So now we get to Mulchemes Mitzvah, and that begins here in Pasuk Tezayin, Ha'arei ha'amim ha'eleh, lo sechaya kol neshama. No preliminary conditions, no offering of peace, no v'karasa aleh l'shalom. Because Rashi's shita is that v'karasa aleh l'shalom only applies to Arim HaRechokos, to Mulchemes Rishus. Is that clear? Now let's take a look on the second page for a moment at the Rambam Hilchos Malachim Perek Hey Halacha Aleph, and you'll see it's marked number 3. It's about 10 lines down from the top of page 2. Zok the Rambam Perek Hey Hilchos Malachim Halacha Aleph Ein HaMelech Nilcham Tchila. Let's underline the word Tchila. We'll come back to it in just a minute. Ela Mulchemes Mitzvah. And the Rambam insists that there's no room for a Milchemes Rishus until you first fulfill the obligation of Milchemes Mitzvah. And therefore, the Rambam adds the word Tchila. And then he asks, V'ezer hu Milchemes Mitzvah? And the Rambam gives three answers. Number one, Milchemes Shiva Amamin. That's the parasha in Dvarim Yud. Number two, Milchemes Amalek, which we saw in both Peshalach and Kiteitzei. And number three, the Rambam adds a third category. The Ezras Yisrael Miyad Tsar Sheba Aleah. So Rabbosai, if I would ask you today, are we involved in a Milchemes Mitzvah? And you would say to me, wait a second, this is not Shiva Amamim. We don't even have the Shiva Amamim anymore. Is it Amalek? Maybe. That requires another study. But let's assume Amalek is genealogical. Basan Cheru Bilwas, we don't have Amalek. Let's assume. So what would generate the status of this milchama that we're fighting to gain against Hamas as a milchemes mitzvah? It's the third category of the Rambam. The Ezras Yisrael Miyad Tsar Sheba'aleh. Well, I don't know why the Rambam classifies that under the mitzvah milchama. Is there a parsha in the Torah that generates an obligation to battle against those who are threatening to destroy us? I know one parsha which is called Lo Tamed Al Dam Riach, but that's not milchama. A man Nebuch is drowning and you're a lifesaver, you could jump in and save him. Lo Tamed Al Dam Riach, the mitzvah v'ashivos lo of Hatzalah, which is Shakul Keneged Kulam. And call Hamatzil Nefesh Achas Miyisrael Malov Akosakilu Hitel Olav U'Maloa Mishnah Sanhedrin. But that doesn't upgrade it to the status of Milchama. There are going to be many, many nafkaminas between Lo Samod Al Dam Riecha and Milchama. So let's leave that as our first major question on the Rambam. How does the Rambam know, from whence does the Rambam derive that Hatzolas Ezras Yisrael Miyad Tsar Sheba'aleh is a mitzvah milchama, and it's the third category of milchama? Now, if it's a milchemes mitzvah, then does the requirement of karasa aleh l'shalom apply, according to what we saw in Rashi? What's the answer? No. There's no v'karasa aleh l'shalom. We're talking about a milchemes mitzvah. The acharkach, now underline the acharkach because we already underlined the word tchila, and the acharkach means after we fought these three battles and we fulfilled our obligation vis-a-vis the three categories of milchemes mitzvah, then nilcham b'milchemes rishus. Now we can open up a new chapter which is called milchemes rishus. V'hiya milchama shenilchamim shar ha'am. Now we ask the question, why? Why would we be motivated to fight a milchemes rishus? The Torah doesn't obligate me. And the Rambam gives two answers. Kidei laharchiv gvul Yisrael, to expand the boundaries of the land of Israel, maybe for security reasons, maybe for monetary reasons. We want to, subjugate them. We want them to build our cities. We want them to pay our taxes. But number two, laharbos b'gdulaso v'sham. Gdulaso. There's a pronoun here. Who's gedula? The one above. So if we're in a period of time in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Meir Panim and he's being matzil us, and we are seeing Nisav flows out in the battlefield, then we might want to even expand beyond our obligation. We're finished with Amalek. We're finished with Zayin Amamim. And now we want to expand the boundaries in order to win more battles and glorify the name of God on a higher level. We haven't yet addressed the question as to who has the authority to press the let's go to war button. And then we have another question. Once that button is pressed by the right authority, then doesn't it become a Milchemes Mitzvah? For some reason, it retains its status because we're up against the Orem Arachokos of a Milchemes Rishus. And in Rashi's frame of reference, this is of stupendous importance, because if you're talking about a Milchemes Mitzvah, there's no V'karas Aleh L'Shalom. If you're talking about a Milchemes Rishus, then the Torah says V'karas Aleh L'Shalom. Is there a nafkamina between a Milchemes Mitzvah and a Milchemes Rishus with regard to Chilul Shabbos? So if you take a look in the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Simon Shin Chaf Tes Hilchos Shabbos, which is number 4 on your page 2, Akum Shetzaru Al Ayoros Yisrael. So we're now talking about L'chora Milchemes Mitzvah, the third category of the Rambam. We are being attacked by the non-Jewish nations. In Boal Iskei Mammon, if we have reason to be sure and certain that they are coming to steal, to pillage our villages and take all the booty, all the money, all the possessions that they can, Ein Mechalas HaShabbos. For the sake of Atzolas Mammon, we do not override the Shabbos. But Boal Iskei Nefashos, Ve'afilu Stam. Okay, we want to understand what the word Stam is. We'll get to that in the Aruch HaShulchan number 5. Then Yotzim Alem B'Kli Zayin Umechalin Alevis HaShabbos. So clearly, when we're in a situation of Milchemes Mitzvah, then we're going to be Mechal Shabbos. Do we have to do it b'shinui? Is it Techuya or is it Hutra? There is no Shabbos. It's like when I once asked my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, about my wife fasting on Yom Kippur. He starts describing symptoms. She was pregnant and so forth and so on. He says, then there's no Yom Kippur. So I said to him, should I feed her pachos mikashir? To this day, I'm doing tshuva on that question that I asked him. He got so angry at me. He said, there is no Yom Kippur. You feed her kesuda shloma milk b'shaito. And I deliberately got him angry. But I didn't want him to get so angry. But so what does it mean, stam? So you take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan, right there in Orach Chaim Simon Shin Chaf Tes, he writes that afilu bo stam on the second line. V'hainu she'ein yadua lanu al ma bo. We're not going to play games here. We don't know whether or not they just want to take money and they're such tzaddikim that after they clear us out of every single piece of silver and anything of value, they're going to just, his bias as Aryeh, and now he's going to leave. He says there's a little bit of a printing mistake here. I apologize. That im ein yadu lanu al mabo havigam kein kibarur or kibirur al iskei nefashos. The stam listim em hargei nefashos. They won't be satisfied with purging, with cleaning out all our possessions, and therefore mechalas HaShabbos. Now, getting back to the Shulchan Aruch in number 4, he says ubeir asmucha l'sfar. Does anybody know what sfar means?
The border.
Excellent, the borders. If you have a city that's on the borders of Israel, afilu bo el aliskei teven v'kash. They just
like
want
Otei Faza.
What do you say?
Otei Faza.
All they're doing is ki'ilu stealing our haystacks. How do you say teven in English?
Straw.
Straw. Excellent. Now, straw is mechalan aleim es HaShabbos. Why? So if you take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan again, that's why I love the Aruch HaShulchan. He expands the Shulchan Aruch. He says the following. He says, Be'ir ho'medes al gvul afilu lo ba'al al iskei teven v'kash mechal es haShabbos. Te'ir kazos im yichbeshua noach lichbosh es kol haaretz. That's what Hamas had in mind. They weren't going to stop at Otef Aza. So we're going to be Machal Shabbos Ke'ilu to protect our straw, to protect our hay. Why? Because it's an Ir Sfar. We see how the enemy is very bloodthirsty, if you know what I'm saying. The Ramah, getting back to number 4 in the Shulchan Aruch, adds another chiddush here. Afilo bo adayin el rotzim lavo. We know that they're planning. We don't have to wait until they start attacking us. And once again, the Aruch HaShulchan adds something. Afilo bo adayin mamish el shemuchanim lavo. And if they're ready to go, we're going to take the initiative. A preemptive war, like the 6-day war. We know that you Mechal Shabbos Mefakenos of Gal is a 1 in 1,000 chance that we could save someone under the Gal. We will violate the Shabbos. We're not going to play games over here. We're not going to take risks. And therefore, even if they haven't yet begun to attack us, and they're only interested, Kaviyachol, in some physical monetary possessions of ours, but we know that they're going to attack us, then we take the initiative. And I'm not sure, but I think that of all the wars that the state of Israel has fought, the most successful was the preemptive war. The only trouble is there was only one such war, and that was the 6-day war. Anyway. Now we look at the Rambam in Halacha Dalet. So we saw the Rambam in Perkei Halacha Aleph in Hilchos Malachim. Now we're fast forwarding to Halacha Dalet, which is number 7 Aleph, because we split up the Rambam into 2 parts. Mitzvah Saseh lahachrim shiva amamim shenemar hachrim tachrim. So we're talking about a mitzvah Saseh. But now the Rambam introduced a mitzvah lo Saseh. There's a lot to be mafalpil here in this Rambam, because the Rambam seems to assume we have to kill every member of the 7 nations, even outside the framework of Mulcham. Sheba liyodo echad mehem. Shenemar lo sechaya kol neshama. Ukfar avad zichva. Mitzvah does no longer apply. But now, number 7 base, Perek Vav Mihilchos Malachim Alachal. Ein osim milchama im adam ba'olam. Please underline those words, im adam ba'olam. Ad shekorim lo l'shalom. What does that mean, im adam ba'olam? Rashi says that v'karasa l'shalom b'milchemes rishus hakosim medaber. And the Rambam goes out of his way to say, im adam ba'olam. There's no milchama until after the karasa le b'shalom. Echad milchemes rishus, v'echad milchemes mitzvah. I don't know where David is. I thought he said he was coming, but anyway, if we have a milchemes mitzvah, Zayin Amamin, Amalek, Ezra Yisrael Miyad Tsar, we need first as a precondition for Karasa Le B'Shalom. If we go back to page 1 and look at the Psukim again, the Rambam refuses to take that line that we separated, the first 6 Psukim, up to Pasuk Tes Vav, from Pasuk Tes Zayin and on. According to the Rambam, the opening line in this parasha, namely Pasuk Yud, v'karasa l'shalom applies to the entire parsha, not only to the Arim HaRachokos, but even to the Arim HaKrovos. Not only to a Milchemes Rishus, but even to a Milchemes Mitzvah. Pil'ei Pla'im, what that means is that we can't go out to battle, according to Rambam, without first an overture of peace.
Can I say something? It almost seems like a bit of a stira, because he's in the first ketz of the Rambam, anytime you see, even not as you said, even not in the Mizgeret of Milchamet, you see somebody from those Amamim, it's a lav not to kill him, and here you have to say Karat Shalom. So if you're Karat Shalom and they say yes, we want peace, and you don't kill them, it seems like that you have a mitzvah to kill all of them. Period, no matter what.
Right. It seems that the mitzvahs aseh of hachrim tachrim and the mitzvahs lo sasev lo sechai kol neshama are on two different mishorim, two different levels. Hachrim tachrim applies to the nation, in this case 7 nations, but lo sechai kol neshama applies even to individual members of that nation genealogically, even outside the framework of milchama. So Yechiel, you're asking the following question: if it's not milchama, then maybe we don't need an overture of peace. So what would be if I met Joe Yavusi on the street, and Joe Yavusi says, "I'm willing to accept all your conditions for peace. Don't kill me." What would be the din then? And I suspect, although I don't have a proof, that in that case you would not kill him. But again, we haven't discussed what are the conditions for peace. What does it mean that the enemy or the 7 nations, according to the Rambam, accepted our peace overture? What does that mean? That's the next section that we want to deal with. But do we see clearly here, Rabosai, unfolding in front of our eyes is a fundamental machlokas between Rashi and the Rambam. And I want to learn with you the Ramban on page 3 to see where the Ramban fits in. Rashi quoted a Sifri, and the Sifri on the pasuk v'karasa oleh l'shalom says b'milchemes rishus hakosu medaber. Either the Rambam had a different source against the Sifri, or he had a different interpretation of the Sifri. And for that, I want to see the Ramban. But honestly, on an intuitive level, if I had my druthers, I would side with Rashi. If the Torah is commanding me in these situations to go out to battle, I don't know that the Torah has preconditions. I don't know that we want to offer peace. When the Torah says, "V'karas aleh b'sholem," I would go with Rashi's shita. That's a Milchemes Rishus. There are limitations to a discretionary war. And one of them is, let's see if they're willing to accept our conditions for peace. But the Rambam says explicitly, Echad Milchemes Rishus, Nicha, but Afilu, I'm going to add another word, Afilu Milchemes Mitzvah. And his opening line is, Ein Osim Milchama Im Adam Ba'ol, Achikorim Lo L'Shol. And by the way, Yechiel, I'm thinking out loud now that the word Adam here might refer to what he said earlier in the first discussion that we had in Perek Hey, the previous Perek, about Ba Liyado Echad Me'am. Maybe the Echad Me'am there is like the Adam Ba'olam here. And even so, we need a Kriya Shalom. I don't know. But it would, in Yiddish, we say Leinzach. Leinzach Sazog. You know, it's an attractive way of interpreting the Rambam. But I don't know. Now, from here on in this long Rambam, at the bottom of your page 2, Perek Vav Halacha Aleph, the Rambam is going to present what are the conditions of peace that have to be accepted by the nations before we go out to battle. Meaning that if they accept conditions X, Y, and Z, then we don't go out to battle. What are those conditions? Now, if we go back to the Psukim, on page 1. So take a look at Pasuk Yud Aleph in Dvarim Chaf, which is the second line in number Gimel. V'haya'im shalom tancha. If their response is yes, we want to take you up on your peace offering. Upascha lecha, pascha lach, v'haya kol ha'ama nimtza ba. What are the conditions? The nation, yiu lecha mas v'avaducha. Let's underline those two words, mas and avaducha. And we usually interpret the word mas to mean taxes. We can levy taxes against those nations that accepted our peace overture. But the Rambam says, no, that's not what mas means. And the Rambam says the following. We're back on the bottom of page 2. The Rambam says, first of all, what if they accept one of these two and not the other? For example, on line 3, kibul aleim mas velo kiblu avdus. I know I skipped a line in the Rambam. We'll get back to that. Or kiblu avdus velo kiblu mas ein shom aleim ad shikablu shneim. So it's a package deal made up of two parts. It's got to be mas and it's got to be avdus. You have to check off both boxes before you can accept their acceptance of peace. Says the Rambam, ha'avdus. So again, we would have said avdus means some sort of a slavery kind of thing. But the Rambam reduces avdus to a psychological state, not to a financial state. Sheikavlu shehu sheyu nivzim ushfelin lemata v'lo yarimu rosh b'Yisrael. I remember when that was true for the Arabs. I mean, I was a youngster, maybe I was 18 years old, I don't know, a little bit younger, 15, 18, that area, when they left their shoes behind, you know what I mean? They ran. Unfortunately, those days are well behind. Today, you drive down the street, and the Arabs can blast music in their car that's louder than even the Jewish music. And I can give you many examples. But the Rambam is saying that what is Yavducha? Yavducha sheyu nivzim ushfelim. Lemata, v'lo yarimu rosh b'Yisrael, yu kvushim tachas yonam, v'lo yismanu al Yisrael l'shum davar shabola. We're not allowed to appoint them for any misra, any srara. That's called avdus. So avdus is really a psychological state of being in which they accept our dominion over them. Call it an apartheid state if you like, but it's really going to be us subjugating them. It doesn't say we were allowed to beat them up. It doesn't say we're allowed to steal their money. But it does say, Lo yarimu rosh. Shiu nivzim ushfelu. So what's mas? Shikablu shiu muchanim lavodas hamelech begufam u'b'mamonim. Kigon, binyan chomos, chizuk mitzudos, binyan armon hamelech v'chayotzi b'zeh. And the Rambam is going to quote Shlomo HaMelech. So mas means that they're willing to accept upon themselves that they'll build the country physically. They'll be involved in building. What did I skip? I skipped a very critical one. There's a third condition in Kabbalas Shalom. And take a look on line number 2. And the one, by the way, Oliver Shalom was killed by an Arab, of course, of someone who emphasized this Rambam that we're going to do now is Rav Meir Kahana. Im ishlimu, what does ishlimu mean? They accepted our peace offering. V'kiblu sheva mitzvah shenitztava b'nei Noach aleim. What is this called? In one word. Starts with a gimel, ends with a taf. Has a resh in it. As a woman, I don't know. I'm not hearing any answer here.
Carlos?
What kind of gerus? There are two types of gerus, right? There's ger tzedek and there's ger toshav. A ger tzedek has to accept 613 mitzvahs, and then basically he's Yisrael l'chol dom. And then there's a ger that accepts 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. He's called a ger toshav. Now the Rambam seems to be talking here about both milchemes rishus and milchemes mitzvah. So if you want to allow members of the 7 nations who occupy Palestine to live in the land, they, according to the Rambam, have to accept not only a psychological state of subjugation of nivzim ushfelim, which is called avdus in the language of the Torah. And not only are they going to be ready and willing to build the countries, the cities in Israel, but they have to become a ger toshav. And elsewhere, not here in Hilchos Malachim, the Rambam speaks about how a goy becomes a ger toshav. It's not enough that he says to you and me, I'm willing to abstain from worshiping idols, etc., etc. He's got to make that declaration in front of a bezdin shel Yisrael, and he has to declare that he accepts the Torah, and therefore he is going to observe the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. I would assume that we can apply that here. 3 conditions before we will allow these people to remain in the land, and we don't destroy them. Number 1, Kiblu Aleim Zayim Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Number 2, Kiblu Aleim Avdus. Number 3, Kiblu Aleim Mas. And this applies not only to a Melchemes Rishus of Arim Rechokos, but even to a Melchemes Mitzvah of Arim Krovos. And now, let's look at the Ramban. The Ramban is on page 3. And as we mentioned at the outset, the Ramban opens with Rashi. Rashi understands that for Karasa Lev B'Shalom only applies to Milchemes Rishus. And the Psukim seem to indicate that. Rashi points out that there are 2 parts to this parsha. And this parsha ends with Arim Rechokos and begins with the V'Karasa Lev B'Shalom. Therefore, B'Milchemes Rishus HaKosim Medaber, says Rashi, Kamoshem Afurish Be'inyan. It says it explicitly in the last pasuk that closes the set. Came ta selachol arva rechokus mimcha meod lashon Rashi. Kosav Arav, Ramban says that Rashi came to this conclusion. Mi Sifri. What does the Sifri say here in Pasha Shoftim? It says Kiloshan Hazeh b'Milchemes Rishus HaKosim Medaber. Rashi is copying the words, 4 words, word for word from the Sifri. Zok the Ramban. Rashi misunderstood the Sifri. Hakavana l'Rav Osena because of Hazeh. What did the Sifri have in mind when it wrote B'Milchemes Rishus HaKosim Medaber? Eina. It's not referring to V'Karasa Lev B'Shalom. That's for the Milchemes Mitzvah as well as the Milchemes Rishus. Elalomar Shaparsha B'Sofa Techalek Bein, and I apologize for the typo here. It should say Shtei HaMilchamos. That at the end of the parsha, we're going to have a distinction between these 2 categories of Milchama. The Torah is going to point out Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama, that we have to destroy men, women, and children. On that, the Sifri comments, B'Milchemes. I'm sorry. Start again. In Pasuk Yud Gimel. Uneson Hashem Elokecha b'yodecha, v'kisa es kol zchura lefi charef. We're only killing the male members of the nation. Rak hanoshim v'ataf v'abehema v'chol asher yeh ba'ir kol shlola tovozla. On that comment, on that pasuk, which ends the section, the chapter of Tesvav, the Sifri adds the comment b'milchemes rishus hakosu b'dav, which means that in milchemes rishus, and only in milchemes rishus, we will fight a battle against the male adults, but not against the male children, or the female children, or the female adults. Avol kriya shalom, says the Ramban, afilu b'milchemes mitzvahi. Exactly what we saw in the Rambam. We should be dancing, one of the rare occasions that the Rambam and the Ramban agree. Shechayovim likros l'shalom afilu l'shiva amamin. How do you know that? Just because it appears at the beginning of this parsha in Pasuk Yud, where it says "V'karos aleh l'shalom," maybe that pasuk is referring, as Rashi insists, in the name of the Sifri, to Milchemes Rishos. And we close that entire section in Pasuk Tesvav, Kain Tasel Chalor Mechokos. But now we start a new parsha in Tesayin, and the Orya Amama Eile, and now we got to destroy men, women, and children, and we're not going to even ask for peace. No, says the Ramban, that's not correct. The opening introduction to this parsha is chal on the entire parsha, whether it's the first 6 psukim of Arim Chokos or the next section, which is Arim Ha'ele, and even in a Milchemes Mitzvah V'karas Ela B'Shalom. That's the precondition. Very difficult. Not only intuitively, but textually. What compelled the Ramban to disagree with Rashi? And I believe the secret here, the joker card, is now being revealed in the next line in the Ramban. Sharei Moshe Kara L'Shalom L'Sichon Melech. What's the next word? Amori. We're talking about Amori. Amori is one of the 7 nations. And Moshe was Korei B'Shalom. For the overall essay, he would not, chas v'shalom, violate the essay of Hachrem Tachrem, which requires us to destroy Amori without Kriya Shalom. V'lal lo taseh shebeparsha lo schaya kol neshama. Ki Hachrem Tachrem v'lo schaya kol neshama. So what does the Sifri mean? If Moshe Rabbeinu has already taught us that even in Milchemes Mitzvah against Zayin Amim, like a Mori, we have to first be Korei B'Shalom, and Moshe would not chas v'shalom have violated an essay to Lo Saseh. So what is the Sifri talking about? Wherein lies the distinction here of B'Milchemes Rishus HaKosim Medaber? Sokter Rabbana Hefresh Beineim, what does the Sifri have in mind? Kashalo Tashlim, if they don't accept our overture of peace, and the 7 nations reject it, v'yasem milchama, they come out to battle against us. Setziva kosa b'rechokos lahakos es kol zchurcha ulahachios lahem hanoshim v'tatam v'aduzam. When it comes to milchemes rishus, then we will destroy the male adults without touching the noshim and the taf, the females and the young boys or young girls. But the Ori Ha'amim Ha'ele, that law does not apply with regard to Milchemes Mitzvah. Okay, then any questions? We have finished what I call Hakafa Aleph. We need one more Hakafa to finish the Ramban, and then I want to go on to explain perhaps the difference between the war that we're engaged in today and the mitzvah of Milcham. Okay, then? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.